Okay, we're running.
Yep. This is George Vosburgh, adjunct professor of trumpet at Duquesne, as well as the principal trumpet of the Pittsburgh Symphony. Now, you've been playing trumpet for how many years now, you figure? When did you start? We'll put it that way.
Okay, I started when I was 7, which I guess that means that I have been playing for 37 years.
Okay.
37 years, I guess.
And of that,
47, excuse me, 47 years.
Okay.
47 years.
And of that, it's been mostly classical playing.
Right.
What we
Right.
consider classical playing.
Right.
So I guess to start off, just describe, if someone says classical technique, what would jump to your mind?
Classical technique
Yes.
for trumpet.
Yeah.
What immediately comes to my mind would be very clean attack, definite hard focused attack. Okay, not a diffuse attack. Very accurate rhythm with a good sound, meaning a full normal tone, not a strident tone, not an airy sound, but just a full tone.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah,
And,
that would make that would be the criteria, I think.
okay. And then kind of almost opposite, maybe. Just describe what you would consider something of jazz technique.
Jazz technique, meaning we're talking now jazz soloist, not lead.
We can do solos, yeah, that's fine.
I mean, my only point is that, I mean, if you're going to talk jazz, as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
there's 2 different types of trumpet players that you need to distinguish between. I mean, one is going to be your lead player,
Yeah.
and the other is going to be your jazz player. Generally, your jazz player is going to have a much more unique individual sound. The way they play, the actual sound of the instrument, you know, it's probably going to be fuzzy, and it's going to have some kind of a sound quality that is going to be almost a 180 from the classical trumpet sound.
Yeah.
Okay. On top of that, then I would say, talking of jazz player, generally that also means that the attack is going to be more diffuse. It's not going to be that piano type of hard articulation that you get in a quote-unquote classical player. So it would be more of a diffuse, kind of more individualistic kind of attack again. If you want to talk about a lead player, the lead player is actually much closer to the classical player, if you will, in the sense that the lead player is responsible for cutting the rhythms impeccably, and cutting the rhythms really, you know, like diamond-edged kind of cutting the rhythms, you know, so that the whole band can swing behind that. Generally, we find with the lead players that even the attacks are more orchestral in nature, only because of the range that they're playing in and the fact that they are leading. I mean, they lead with the attack as much as they're leading with the sound and the rhythm. So I would say that's a distinct difference between the two. And then, I mean, also the other thing too is that, I mean, even to the point where, like, the sound of the lead player, while maybe not be orchestral in nature, but it's closer to a classical sound in the sense that it's a very, very strong, very, very vibrant sound. Okay, whereas the soloist might be a softer, rounder sound, not worrying about the projection as much as playing, being a soloist and just, you know, communicating in a different way.
Yeah. Okay. So when you got into orchestras fairly early,
Yes.
right? Graduated college.
Actually, I was playing when I was in college.
Okay. At that time, was there call for playing jazz within the orchestra? Was it required?
At that point, this was 1976 is when I started. Okay. And at that point, pretty much anything that came down the pike that was remotely jazz, they would go out and they'd hire a jazz trumpet player to come in and do it. That since has changed because of, you know, economic considerations, to the point now, and it also depends on the players you have in the section, obviously. To the point now where here and in other orchestras besides this one, we try pretty much to handle everything that comes down the pike, and that includes very involved jazz solos at times, where trumpet players from the section are out in front playing jazz solos, to screaming lead books, just towering. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I was playing to F concert for a whole book of F concerts. It's not easy stuff. So I think that's changed. There are still orchestras that will use a lead player for that kind of thing, but I'd say maybe it's 50-50. Smaller the orchestra, the more they expect the first trumpet player to be able to do that.
Okay. And we'll go to that piece that you played with the Pops recently, the concert Fs. How did you approach that piece? I would imagine more of a classical stylized player. How did you approach the jazz in those pieces?
Well, but I mean, there was no jazz because it's lead, which is not jazz. But I mean, for one thing, it's a total change of equipment, total change of equipment, and for another, then me knowing the characteristics of what a good lead trumpet player is supposed to sound like, because I've known quite a few of them in my day. Alan Weiss comes to mind. He played lead with Maynard's band, Maynard himself, and certainly Doc Severinsen, along with Al Vizzuti and Vince DiMartino. These guys, I know their sound. I know what that lead sound is supposed to sound like. So I mean, as much as I wouldn't say that I'm a lead player. I would say I'm like a faux lead player, if you will. I'm faking it well, but it works.
Yeah.
I'm still playing a C trumpet, but when you listen to it, it's screaming lead.
Yeah.
And then of course the other thing too is there is no real hard attack. Then it gets a more diffuse attack because I'm using a mouthpiece that is going to accommodate the range, where you can't really make too. You can still tongue hard, but not as hard as the bigger mouthpieces that we use in the orchestra. So I don't know. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's fine. It's how you approach that particular piece. I know from a previous talk we had, you said that you used to do some of those improvisations,
right.
solos.
Right.
And it was you would write certain spots, but still improvise over
exactly.
other sections.
Exactly.
Is it still something you practice just in case?
At this point, I got to a point where, because I've been doing this now for like I don't even know how long I've been doing it, but decades and decades and decades. But I'm to a point in my life now where there's certain things that I've let go. That I've just decided I'm not going to do this thing anymore. The Brandenburg is one. I'm 54 years old. I'm not playing the Brandenburg anymore. I've recorded it. I've played it 27 times in performance live. And most of those have been great. It's gone. I've done my bit for God and country with the Brandenburg. And the improv solos are another thing that I took out.
Okay.
Particularly, it would be one thing if I was in a section where I felt like where I needed to do it, because I can do it to a greater or lesser extent. I can go out there and I can do it. But considering that we have Chuck in the section, who does it very, very easily, and he's very, very fluid, and it's always really very nice when he does it. And he likes to do it.
Yeah.
So I have no reason to really knock myself out to do it.
Yeah. Right. And then when you were playing those
yes.
improvisations, were you listening to jazz at that point?
Basically, what I was doing was when I did it, my whole thing when I did it was I would get the piano score, and I would basically sit at the piano, and I can play the piano reasonably, so that I would sit, and essentially what I would do is play through the tune, the head, get a feel for it, and then essentially I would just sing, improv singing over it until I came up with something with ideas that I felt were appropriate for the moment, which I would assume is the same kind of thing that a real jazz player is doing, only they're doing it directly in their head and then they're just sending it directly through the horn.
Yeah.
Which it's something that I've just never developed to a point where I could stand up in public and do that. Now, what I have done at one point was I did a free improv. One year I did the Haydn trumpet concerto, and the style of the time in classical music was to just get up there and improvise in the cadenza on site. And so I did that for a whole string of performances, 3 performances. I improvised the cadenza at the end of the first movement. And you know, our brilliant critics in town, I mean, you know, they slammed me because they said that the cadenza was a little bit disjunct. But it's like, well, hello, I'm making it up right here on the spot, you know? But as far as the jazz goes, for me, I would love to play the piano, you know, and then for me it was singing. I would sing over it, and then, you know, I'd say, yeah, great, I like that, and I'd put that down.
Yeah.
And for me, then I would put it down in cells, various cells, so that I knew, you know, if I used that as a framework or a foundation around this chord structure, that I wasn't going to sound like a fool.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the way that I had seen guys do it. Going to Eastman, you know, I can remember many times watching Al Fazzuti get out in front with a, you know, a little sheet this big, you know, just lay it on the music stand, and, you know, I mean, it was more than just the chord symbols, what those guys had in front of them. They had some ideas.
Okay. But were there, when you were improvising, was there anybody that you listened to before, any bands that, you know, probably Buddy Rich was big around that time? Like, were these things that you were listening to, or you just kind of did a general listen, okay, that I kind of got the idea?
When I was a kid, Stan Kenton was really big, okay, and I listened to Kenton, and I listened to Maynard. Those are probably the two big bands. I mean, of course, I listened to Blood, Sweat, and Tears with Lou Soloff, but I mean, and I knew Lou because I was in New York. Okay. But and my teacher was like a club player, one of my first teachers. Actually gave me my chops, and so I listened to him. You know, so I mean, I definitely heard a fair amount of good improv. And then even when I went to Chicago, I was hanging out with Bobby Lewis, who was he's retired now, but I mean, he was a beautiful jazz player. And he had a group and a club, and he was a really great guy to get to know and to listen to. So, and jazz being very popular in Chicago, there was a long time where we would go at the end of concerts. We would take off and go to the Blackstone, and we would hear whoever the big artist was in Chicago, you know, that week, and we did that for years. So I mean, I've listened to a fair amount of jazz.
Surrounded yourself.
Yeah,
a bit.
yeah, and I've gotten that, and you know, being at Eastman, we had really, really good jazz at Eastman. Ray Wright was there at that point, and Vince DiMartino was there with Al Fazzuti. I mean, you know, it was the real deal. These guys were really doing it.
Yeah.
So then, being in Chicago, I worked with these guys in the studio with the studio players, and essentially we would go into the gig, and it was very, very cordial. And even sometimes John Faddis would fly in. We'd work with John, and we'd just sit down and we'd figure out, you know, what are we doing here today? And if it was anything remotely classical, then I would play lead. Mm-hmm. When I mean remotely classical, in other words, if it was rock and roll, you know, something like with just hard rhythm and cutting rhythms, they would give it to me. If it had a hint of swing, they would take it. Mm-hmm. And that's the way we functioned for like 13 years like this. This section was a first call section, and we did a lot of work, and everybody had a good time.
Now you also play as well with the orchestra in a quintet, I imagine.
Sextet.
Sextet. Okay. Do you guys ever have a chance to do that, or do you ever want to right now?
The only one that's doing it right now is Pete Sullivan, and it's kind of interesting because Pete, different, you know, it's all personalities. Yeah. Here's Pete. He is brilliant at this. Okay, he's absolutely brilliant at it, and yet he hates to do it, and he just doesn't want to do it. His on our first album, our first Christmas album, his brother did an arrangement of Three Kings for him, and it's got a long trombone solo in it, where we're just back there and we're just vamping on chords, you know. So it's open solo. He hates this so much that we had to cut it out when we do it live. He won't do it, and it's fantastic. I mean, when you hear him do it, it's unbelievable. He's the real deal. He can really do it.
Okay.
Doesn't want to do it.
But let's say you as a group in total, you say, oh, let's do maybe like that mix of classical jazz. Maybe do Summertime, or you know, something from Porgy and Bess.
We do Porgy and Bess, but there's really no jazz in the Porgy and Bess arrangement. It's all written out. But I mean, you know, of course, we're playing the style for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I guess that's more what I'm going towards.
Yeah,
Maybe not improvisation, but maybe there's some swinging, or there's definitely this kind of influence.
You've got to, I mean, you know, it doesn't matter, I mean, whatever music you're gonna play, I don't care if it's bluegrass, you've gotta capture the essence, you know, and that means you've gotta have a lot of style in your bag, you know, to do this. So, yes, I mean, of course, you know, we're swinging and we're bending, we're throwing as much at it as we possibly can, as, you know, and everybody's bringing their own stuff to it, and, you know, of course it sounds fine, you know, so it's totally swung.
Okay. Now, kind of getting away from just you as a player, going to more you as a teacher. Let's see, kind of thinking towards graduating musicians out of college. Is this knowledge of classical and jazz together? Maybe not, like super proficient in both at one time, but you know, at least knowing one from the other, be able to, they say in jazz, fake your way through it.
Right.
You know, that's definitely a skill to have.
Right. And what I have done, what I've always done, is, because I'm basically, generally when people come to study with me, they're legitimate classical trumpet players and they want to play that way. So I'm not pushing them into a jazz situation. But every once in a while, every few years, I will get a real honest to God crossover player that will be somebody like more like Sean here. Not Sean Wilson.
Okay. John Jones.
Yes. Where, you know, I mean, like he's got a really, really beautiful sound, and you can tell it. I mean, he's got some real serious, you know, like honest classical training, if you will, or, you know, legitimate training, whatever you want to call it. But yet, you know, he can do all this other stuff as well. When I get a player like that, what I'll do is I have a set of books that I will sort of steer them towards that will allow them to do some of this stuff for me, and then I'll have them actually bring in some solos. You know, they'll write out some stuff. They'll pick a tune, write out the. There's a good book of Miles solos. Do you know that book?
I've seen it. Yeah.
It's a really good book. It's really nice. In fact, I was thinking at some point. Now I'm not going to do it, but at one point I was thinking that I was going to, you know, like do a recital and just do a whole set out of that book. Just play the book. You know. And I mean, but for me, I would probably play the solos. They're all the Miles solos written out. I would just absolutely play them.
Yeah.
You know, I play them like a recital.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, this is interesting. You know Arturo Sandoval?
Yes.
Okay. Now he is a magnificent trumpet player. I mean, and he's a fantastic, I mean, improvisational guy. I mean, he can really play all over the place.
Yeah.
He came through once. He came here once, but he came through Chicago when he was younger with a small group at the Blackstone. We all went down to hear him. And he played this magnificent set, you know, it was whatever, an hour long, however long he played, you know, and it was fantastic. Took the break, you know, we sat around, he didn't drink, of course, but we had drinks, you know, we had dinner and all this stuff, then he'd go back for the second set, the late set. He got up there, he played exactly the same solos in the second set. He was playing a bloody trumpet recital. We couldn't believe it. We absolutely couldn't believe it. And I mean, I don't know why he did that, because I mean, he's you know, completely fluent.
Yeah.
But it was the strangest thing. It's like up there playing a recital. Two sets identical. Every note. Weird.
Makes it easy for the rhythm section.
I don't know. It was really a strange thing. So
with any students coming in, do you ever say, okay, well, I'm going to teach you classically, but you know, kind of maybe look at this stuff if you want to go further on?
If they ask me about it, then that's when I'll go down that route.
Okay.
And in fact, I have at one point I did a whole, it must be floating around here somewhere, but I did a whole 4-year curriculum, and I put some of this stuff in there.
Okay.
Of you know, things of where I would send these guys.
Yeah. I guess maybe just 2 more questions here. Could it kind of be maybe a requirement when you're here in college? Because you want to get a broad education, a good idea of everything, to maybe require at least some sort of, if you're a classical player, some sort of at least one jazz class, or if you're a jazz, then go, you know.
Let me put it to you this way, and I know that I'm really incriminating myself here because I'm putting it down on tape. For me personally, if it was the difference between taking a semester of jazz as opposed to a semester of eurythmics, absolutely take the jazz.
Okay.
You know, and if anything should be cut, the eurythmics should be cut, if, in my opinion, completely cut away with.
Okay.
But, you know, I'm sorry. There's not a performer on the stage that's ever going to get up there and say, I owe it all to eurythmics.
Yeah.
Okay? So, I mean, yes, I would say there's definitely room in the curriculum for this kind of thing. Definitely.
All right. And do you see, I don't know how many musicians you see coming out of college at this point, but you kind of see, I keep hearing this drop in you know, orchestras and some classical gigs, and on the same route you see some dropping on the jazz. The orchestras, there's not as many orchestras as there were, you know, 20 years
Mm-hmm.
ago.
Mm-hmm.
But would you see more players making it, let's say, in classical or jazz nowadays, or is it both?
To me, the best a jazz player can do, the absolute best a jazz player can do at this point, is get a teaching job. That's just the way it is. I mean, jazz is alive and well in the universities. But as far as being a jazz musician and playing in clubs and making a living of that, I would think that would be a really hard life.
Okay.
You know, and I think that that's why all of your really, really fine jazz players basically teach at a university, because it can sustain them and at the same time still allows them the freedom to go out and you know, do what they love to do. I mean, right now, what do we have? We have the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
That's about it. As
Yeah.
far as I know.
Right. So
That's
I
big
mean, you know,
names.
there's your answer right there. You know, and I mean even that. I mean those guys are freelancing around that too. I mean it's not their only. They don't just show up to Lincoln Center every day like the Philharmonic.
Yeah.
So you know, I think that you know it's tough. There's more of a chance if you're just looking for a quote unquote job. If you're not going to teach at the university level, you know you try to get a job in a symphony orchestra, which is a whole other can of worms. But yeah, you know the answer to that.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of say on what I've asked you?
I think that I think this is good. I think this is a good avenue that I don't know if anybody's really approached before. That definitely worth exploring and going down this road about, you know, just making people a little bit more aware of what the differences are and being able to do a little of both. Because for sure there are people that step into symphony orchestras that are clueless, and you know I fear for them.
Okay, and the final question I have
Mhm.
for you is, would you mind if I posted this on YouTube?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. That's fine.
All right.
I have no
Thank you
problem
for
with
your time.
So I.